Thanks so much for everyone for coming. We really appreciate seeing a full room, and that's why we like to bring food so we can get a full room. So my name is Rima Abiakar. I'm with the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, and this is called Walk, Bike, Ride Greater Peoria, and we hope to focus on the methods of transportation that you can do yourself as a single person. So you can bike by yourself, you can walk by yourself, things like that. Take transit on kind of a smaller scale. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. And we are putting this on with a partnership with the Illinois State YMCAs. If Christy is still here, could you wave your hand? There she is, way in the back. Thank you. So I'm just going to give a short presentation here. We're going to start with some quick notes. And if you signed in, if you registered in advance, you might remember that it asked if you're okay that your photo is being taken. We currently have video happening right now, which we're very glad to have, as well as photos. So if you're not okay with that, just simply go to either side, so the camera won't catch you on the sides. You can do that at any time. And let's see, so we just want to note that the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission is committed to maintaining an environment that is courteous, respectful, and free from harassing behaviors, and such harassment will not be tolerated. So for example, please always ask permission before touching other people or their belongings. And in terms of safety, you can see the exit is there, and we have bathrooms over by that other exit sign. And with that, here's our schedule today. So I'm just here to introduce our wonderful speakers. And we're going to start with Mark Fenton, then move to Charles Brown. And after that, we're going to ask you to give your thoughts. We're doing a group discussion. That's why we've got all these lovely tables here, so we can talk about how you felt about the presentations, how you can contribute to your community. So I'll give a really short overview of what the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission is. So we are what's called a Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO. And we cover the 3 counties of Peoria, Woodford, and Tazewell. And we have kind of a 3-tiered, like a 3-level stool. We cover transportation, environment, and land use. So what we're doing today is mostly transportation, but really it could touch any of those. So that's something to think about as we go about our evening. Oh. We're hiring, by the way. So if you know anyone who finds this interesting, who is looking for a job, we would love to have you. We do have next to the door in the sign-in sheet there, we have some of our applications, some of our job descriptions. So feel free to take them for yourself or someone else. We'd love to have someone from the community because local knowledge is one of the best things that we can have once we have this planning process. And actually, since we're on the topic of Tri-County, could all our staff members please wave, say hello. We got some on both sides of the room. Excellent. All right, so what's next? And the reason that we're having this is that we want your feedback. We want you to say, I like my community, but I don't like this walking on this street, or I would love to take the bus more, but it's not best for me right now. So we want to hear all your comments, positive and maybe not so positive. And then we will take those comments and we will match them with things like urban planning best practices. So we'll look at what other folks are doing around the country, and maybe we can do something here that can solve our problems. And then finally, we will put together a bike and pedestrian transportation plan. So we will put all of our ideas together and ultimately help fund projects that can help solve these solutions. And I would be remiss if I don't comment about all the other initiatives that are happening locally. So I'm going to just list them, and if anyone is part of this, each organization, you can stand up or wave, and we can look around and see what type of folks we have in the room. So first is the Social Determinants of Health Committee. I know we've got a couple people. There we go. Perfect. And we have Peoria County 61605 Transportation Equity Study. There we go. Love it. We can double dip, we're allowed. And then we have our Walkability Action Institute local group. And so if you want to get further involved, there are all these folks and more that you can connect with. There's also a couple statewide initiatives that are happening as well. So a lot of people want to think about how we can better our communities. So now I am going to introduce our very first speaker. We have two speakers here today that we're very excited about. And the first one, I also added a poster of another event that some of you might have attended. On February 1st, he came to East Peoria for a walk audit, and that is essentially a kind of a tour around the community and a discussion about what makes it good and what we could improve. So Mark Fenton is a national public health planning and transportation consultant, an adjunct associate professor at Tufts University's Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, and former host of the America's Walking series on PBS television. He has authored numerous books, including the best-selling Complete Guide to Walking for Health, Weight Loss, and Fitness. He was a developer of the University of North Carolina's Safe Routes to School Clearinghouse, and a facilitator for the Walkable Community Workshop series of the National Center for Bicycling and Walking. He now provides technical training and community planning as an independent consultant. Mark was a member of the United States National Race Walking Team from 1986 to 1991, and he competed in the 1984 and 88 Olympic trials in the 50-kilometer or 31-mile race walk. He studied biomechanics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was a researcher at the Olympic Training Center's Sports Science Laboratory in Colorado Springs, and a manager of Reebok's Human Performance Laboratory. Mark has research publications and articles related to exercise science, physical activity promotion, and community-level interventions. He's a vocal advocate for non-motorized transportation, a frequent consultant on bicycle and pedestrian community plans, like we're doing now, and recognized authority on public health issues and the need for community, environmental, and public policy initiatives to encourage more walking, biking, and transit use. That is a mouthful because he's done so much. So I am now very happy to introduce Mark Fenton.
Very kind, much too generous. Rima, that was really kind, and somebody did a lot of research, and what you just should have said was Mark Fenton is a big walking nerd. He really is big on this whole walking thing and thinks it's really important. I think I have to actually switch my slides, I just realized. So give me 30 seconds to do that. We just took a walk. So I came in February. You guys invited me to be here in February, and we did that workshop, and it was wonderful, and it was also freezing cold. So I'm extremely happy that today we got to do this walk in these conditions. No, that's not it. Hang on. Does that look like my slides? There they are. Yay! I've actually been a bunch of times. I've been privileged to come and visit, and we did a workshop way back in 2019 over at the Harrison School. I've been working with the YMCA a lot over the years, so it's a real privilege to be back. And I'm going to kind of set the table for my friend and colleague Charles. because we do some of this work all over the country actually together. I'd like to talk for a couple minutes about the health imperative. Why is a YMCA? You hear planning organization, you hear sidewalks and bike lanes, you say, okay, I get it, planning, transportation, that's what they do. Why does the Y care about this? I do a lot of my work for the Centers for Disease Control. We teach a course together for the CDC, and it's called their National Walkability Action Institute. Why does the Centers for Disease Control care? So I want to give you 2 seconds of background on that and what we think we've learned about building healthier communities by design. And I'd also like to acknowledge that you can do all the right stuff and it can still fail. That there's a lot to getting it right at the community level. I think we saw some of that on our walk this afternoon, and I'm going to suggest you are doing some very promising things here in Peoria that set you up for success. So here's the quick version of the health story. We know we should be physically active. Surgeon General told us almost 30 years ago that if every American adult could average about 30 minutes of physical activity a day, and if kids could get at least an hour a day, it would be better if you got more, but at least if you got those minimum recommendations, you'd reduce your risk for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, clinical depression, dementia in old age, a growing list of cancers, pretty close to a silver bullet. Go out for a 30-minute walk every day, you'll live a longer, healthier life. One of the problems is those kinds of images are what most people see and think of when we talk about physical activity. And they forget that that person walking to the bus stop or that kid riding his bike here in Peoria, if they're going on an errand and they're doing it physically actively, it counts. So physical activity can be a part of daily life. It doesn't have to be a separate thing. So that's the good news. That sounds like a very attainable goal, right? 30 minutes a day. Here's the bad news. We are mostly not physically active. As a society, we spend a lot of time in front of screens. Our jobs are increasingly sedentary. We've built transportation systems that focus entirely on cars. You could, if you were at Rolling Acres Middle School with me earlier today, or at Harrison School back when we did the workshop there yesterday, the number of cars lined up there at arrival and dismissal is to the point that most of you avoid elementary and middle schools at arrival and dismissal time now because you know of the induced traffic. Is that not right? How many here would consciously alter your travel route to avoid being near a school, right, when all the traffic is there? So I'm not making that up. And indeed, there's data that tells us maybe 40% of youth, maybe 10% of adolescents, and about 5% of adults actually meet those physical activity guidelines. That's why the CDC cares about this. Telling people to exercise simply is not working. Exercise encouragement programs, walking clubs, all that stuff, not moving the needle on the percentage of Americans. What does work is building communities where people get physical activity as part of their daily life, where kids, in fact, once again, walk to school, where people ride their bike for errands, hop on the bus to get to work. There's very good data to say that we see lower rates of obesity, lower cardiovascular disease risk in communities where people have those opportunities, equitably, across the population, where everyone has that opportunity. Indeed, in 2015, the Surgeon General published this thing called the Surgeon General's Call to Action to Promote Walking and Walkable Communities. Note that it didn't just say to promote walking. It said walking and walkable community. It essentially said Mark and Charles have been right for 2 decades, because we've been talking about this for a long time, that you can't just tell people to exercise if you don't build places where they can do it safely. And we even know from the research how to build those places. We know 4 things, and we talked about this on our walk, characterize settings where you tend to see people walking, bicycling, taking transit more. Number 1, there's a variety of different kinds of destinations. You can live close to where you work and shop and play and learn and pray, right? You don't have to get in a car for every trip. What a planner would call a mix of land uses. 2, you need a network connecting those land uses, sidewalks, bicycle lanes, multi-use pathways, good, reliable, quality, and affordable transit. Again, a planner would call that a network of active transportation facilities. So you got to have the land uses and you have to connect them. But that's not enough. The details of design have to reward you for being there without your car, rather than punish you, right? So if you look at that picture on the left, there are dozens of things in that photo that make it more appealing to be a pedestrian. Street trees, awnings on the building. The building is at the sidewalk, not set behind a parking lot, right? There's a bike rack, there's a water fountain. There are other people. There's street seating. No one of those things alone does it, but all of them together create a setting where we're more likely to walk, we're more likely to bike, take transit. And last but not least, it's got to be safe, functional, and inviting across the spectrum of age and race and income and ability and disability. All those details have to be there. You know those curb ramps at every intersection with those tactile surfaces, those little domes, the bumps, so a blind or visually impaired person knows they are stepping from the sidewalk into the street. All those details matter. And what we know is you put those things in place, you will tend generally to see people out being active more. So that's the happy news. We have a roadmap, a prescription, if you will. But that's not enough. Because when we say the word safe, that has a lot of meanings. It's not just safe from getting run over by a speeding car, right, having a well-marked crosswalk, but also from discomfort, right, from either scary places or people or animals. In other words, the details of the environment more broadly matter. So when we ask, why are people not attaining these physical activity goals? Here they are. They're very straightforward. Get your 30 minutes. We ought to start to look at what are the factors that might discourage people. And when we look at populations, for example, we are told, for example, that African Americans in this country are at higher risk for type 2 diabetes. Right? Now, why might that be? Well, it turns out one of the things we see from the data is that people of color and people of low income are at much higher risk as pedestrians. We see higher rates of injuries and fatalities among those populations. So if I happen to live in a neighborhood where I feel like it's more likely I'm going to get hit by a car because we haven't invested in sidewalks, where traffic is speeding, where there aren't well-marked crosswalks, pretty hard for me to say I'm going to go out and get my 30-minute walk to reduce cardiovascular disease in 30 years, but risk being run over right now. Right? If the imminent threat is right there, if it feels unsafe, how is it reasonable that you expect me now to go out and get your 30-minute walk every day? Or let my child walk to school, or walk them to school? You guys with me on this? So these inequities that are built into the safety, by the way, that data is from a study called Dangerous by Design by an organization called Smart Growth America that looks at pedestrian fatalities in the country. Similarly, wheelchair users, we see much higher rates of risk for pedestrian fatality. You'll notice it goes down with age. The different colors go from 30 to 50 years old, 50 to 64, and 65 plus. And you'll say to me, boy, it looks like once you get to older ages, wheelchair users are at lower risk than the general population of being hit by a car or killed by a car. The reason is because they're not even trying to venture out anymore. They've given up, right? They've just been sequestered to their home. So there are a number of attributes that can put us in a position where we are at greater risk as a pedestrian, such that we're never going to get that physical activity goal because it's just too dangerous out there. Let me further add just a couple of other things that I think will ring true with those of you that know Peoria's history, that have historically influenced particular populations to be very challenged regarding their opportunities to be physically active and to use the active transportation choice. That would be historic segregation, transportation policies, enforcement policies and practices, and what we call gentrification and displacement that can come with trying to make the changes we're talking about here. These are just four of many factors that have caused inequities, right, in how people have the opportunity to take advantage of an active lifestyle. But this book, by the way, I highly recommend. It's called The Color of Law by a guy named, an economist named Richard Rothstein, that essentially looked at our history of institutionalized racism and segregation built into housing loans. You've all, I'm sure, heard the term redlining. That's actually a red line map from Peoria. So you can actually see the districts where black people were told, you're not going to be able to get a mortgage here. The Home Ownership Loan Corporation will not guarantee a mortgage here. That's effectively what redlining was. It essentially said, can't buy a house in this neighborhood. And it was built into the guidance. But just so you don't think Peoria is alone, know that this was endemic across the country. Rothstein's book is a compelling study of it. But the vestiges of that last to this day in cities across the country. By the way, I show the example of Austin, Texas to the right. Their 1928 city plan is, in my mind, notorious and even infamous for how it chose to deal with this issue. It actually, I've underlined a phrase here where they used this language. They said, the planners recommend the creation, quote, of a Negro district where all of the facilities, remember, this is in the area when we had such institutionalized racism, there were white and black swimming pools, white and black commercial institutions. So they said, well, we'll just cluster all those for black people in the same, by the way, lowest value neighborhoods, the ones nearest the railroad tracks and the stockyards in Austin, notoriously. I just need to put this on the table so we have a sense of the vestiges of conscious policy decisions that we collectively, as we do planning now in 2023, we need to still be, I believe, acutely aware of and think about how we remedy those as we think about equity in our work. Another would be historic roadway construction. I grew up in upstate New York, outside of Rochester, New York. We had a classic trenched highway, a highway that sort of divided historically ethnic and black neighborhoods from the downtown district. But cities across the country, lots of Rust Belt cities like Milwaukee and Cleveland had these. Peoria had its kind of classic one-way streets, right? Jefferson and Adams. What were they about? They were about facilitating white flight from the downtown, letting people live out in the suburbs, drive into town to work, but abandon downtown, right? And had all sorts of economic implications. Now, I want to tell you a happy story. You know one of them, which is that Peoria is planning to restore Jefferson and Adams to two-way traffic, which is a step in the right direction, certainly. I'll tell you the happy story of Rochester, New York, that envisioned filling in this trenched highway with mixed housing, affordable housing, a mix of land uses, a walkable, bikeable grid of streets. And guess what? Over the years, as I go home to visit my folks in that area, I've followed their deconstruction of the highway and reconstruction of a surface artery that has bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, and most importantly, mixed housing that, Andre, you and I were talking about this before, includes a lot of affordable housing stock to help overcome the risk of gentrification that's going to come. This is going to become a highly desirable neighborhood, and it could well be the neighborhood that then prices out the folks that historically lived nearby. Right, which would end up being undermining the very goal of the work. So they're building in housing, a mix of housing types in this work to overcome that. I have to share some of Charles' work, not to steal his thunder, but only because he has taught me much about this. Disparate enforcement has been a great deterrent, for example, for communities of color, for walking and bicycling. These are maps that show where cycling infractions were over a period of time in the city of Chicago, the Chicago metro area. And on the right, the heat map shows the darker red colors are where the highest proportion of non-white population is. You could overlay the maps. So essentially, what it said was, biking while black is now as dangerous as driving while black, from a standpoint of unjustified traffic stops, right? That's essentially what that data is telling us. Charles and his team, by the way, have published a great piece. And again, I don't want to steal your thunder, my friend, but this is an extraordinary. It's a podcast, Arrested Mobility, that you can find at that website. And this document, their recent publication, really tears into the data and, most importantly, begins to list remediation. What can we do about this at the policy level? And I would suggest when you're doing a thing like a regional active transportation plan, a number of these recommendations are relevant to policy recommendations that could be built into this plan. So I suggest that we need to think about this, right? Disparate enforcement practices as we think about how we do better. The last one I just alluded to a moment ago, gentrification and displacement. One of the notorious stories around this is a very contemporary one. Atlanta, Georgia is building a beautiful perimeter trail on old rail corridors called the Beltline. If anybody's been to Atlanta, it's fantastic. All these pictures of people out recreating, walking, bicycling. It has become so desirable, however, that developers are now buying up all the land adjoining it, including historic black neighborhoods that were vibrant and economically robust. But they're being turned into, you can see literally in the picture on the bottom here, housing that is replacing the individual single-family homes. They're now putting in these high-value condos and so on. So yet again, people are being priced out and moved out of these neighborhoods. Now, the good news is there are actual policies that can be put in place in anticipation of this. So again, Andre, you and I were talking about this on the walk. As you're successfully regenerating the economy here in Peoria, this is a research paper actually from a bunch of researchers, including a bunch at the CDC, around best practices in reducing the likelihood of gentrification and displacement, of people being priced out of their neighborhood as it becomes more desirable. Right? And I would go so far as to say some of that has to do with just being clever on the types of housing that are available, and not just doing big single-family homes or high-density apartments, but row houses and townhomes and accessory dwelling units. These are just examples. There are many, many more that are in that paper, but I'm going to suggest that we've got to get more creative, and those creative solutions are out there, but we've got to be using them. Peoria, I believe, is on the path. This region is. You passed in 2015 a complete streets policy. You are beginning to build trails. When we were over in East Peoria in February when it was freezing cold, we walked a little bit on part of the trail there along the levee and so on. You're thinking about more mixed housing types, and we're seeing different types of affordable housing coming in here. And indeed, I want to give a nod to those of you that worked on the complete streets policy, got it passed, and passed a complete streets design manual that I think should be fully integrated into the regional active transportation plan. All of the best practices recommended here should be voted by City Council, adopted by Planning and Engineering and Public Works staff. That's just a given. You should do that. Don't have a policy like this unless you're going to adopt those practices. But we just, on our walked along a section of Western Avenue that was trying to apply some of those principles. Bicycle lanes narrowing from 5 lanes. The upper portion of Western Ave still has that 5-lane alignment, the top picture. The portion we walked has the 3 motor vehicle lanes. 2 lanes, 1 in each direction, plus a center turn lane, bicycle lanes. It's really different. You're, as I said a moment ago, planning to and have the funding and have said you're going to change Jefferson and Adams back into, convert them, at least a portion of them, back into 2-way streets. These are really important steps to restore the life and the energy and the economic activity along those categories, those areas. One last story I want to tell. The other cool thing you're doing is what we call pop-up demonstrations, very low cost. On the walk, we were talking about how costly some of this stuff can be. But one of the solutions can be to try very low-cost examples of these and measuring, actually collecting data. And seeing whether they work. So this was a very simple idea. We were at a school in Boston, and the kids wanted to try a median island, and they made it literally with cones from the PE teacher, and having decided it would work, they got the Public Works Department to create this. Those are just what we call vertical delineators. They're those flexible posts that are attached to the pavement and paint, but it makes it a much safer crossing. Very much less expensive than digging up asphalt, pouring concrete. You can do that for thousands of dollars rather than tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, could we be doing stuff like this, these low-cost demonstrations? Well, you did, actually. In September of 21 on Main Street, some of you were involved in this, you actually did a redesign of Main Street, a couple of blocks of it. Well, I guess 1 block, right? The Jefferson to Main block. The concept was take a 4-lane road down to 2 lanes, put bicycle lanes in the portion that remains, even put one of those bicycle lanes back behind the parking lane, so a protected bicycle lane or an at lane edge bicycle lane. But here's the really cool thing you did. By the way, quick side note, the YMCA, as a partner in this, actually helped to buy lots of those cones and paint and materials that you used to create this. It's now in a trailer that's usable by all of you. I'm giving a nod to Andy Thornton back there at the Y up at the Peoria. We were up unloading cones 2 days ago to set them up at Rolling Acres Middle School yesterday and today. The other thing, though, that the Y did, they've got a Teen Reach program, brought out student citizen researchers. So these are a bunch of kids in their after-school Teen Reach program actually collecting data. Middle schoolers, mind you. And they said, we want to measure the speed of vehicles, the number of pedestrians and bikes, cars, pedestrian crossings. They measured it before the demonstration was put in and then afterwards. And they compared the data. These are some of their traffic counts. So that's their kids' handwriting. I want you to know, this is not the grown-ups doing it. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders did it. They got traffic counts, 50, 60 vehicles a day on the 4-lane road, 30 to 50 pedestrians. What happened was there was a festival going on the weekend that they did the pop-up demonstration, so the vehicle counts were about twice as much, pedestrian counts about 3 times as much, a few bicycles, and an interesting thing the kids observed. People were crossing at mid-block, not just at the 2 crosswalks at the end. So we asked these, I'm going to say it again, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, not traffic engineers, not planners with degrees, what was going on? And they said, well, I think with only 2 lanes of traffic, it's not as scary as opposed to 4 lanes, right? It's easier to cross. Plus, the traffic slowed down, and they know that because they collected the data. This is a histogram of a handful of the vehicles before the installation was put in. You'll notice average speed's 23 miles an hour, and it went up to 28, 29. The kids know that speed kills. We actually taught them this. We showed them some of the data that says you get hit by a car going 40, it's an 85% chance of death, 45% chance at 30 miles an hour, and a pedestrian hit by a car only going 20 miles an hour has a very high chance of survival. So they know speed matters. They said after the installation was put in, this was the data, the blue bars. And they pointed out that although the average speed only dropped 3 miles an hour, from 23 to 20 miles an hour, you eliminated all the high-speed vehicles, the ones that would have been the most dangerous, the ones that would have done the most damage if you got hit by them. They said, take away a couple of lanes, take away the fastest cars. Obviously, pedestrians feel safer here. Changes the environment. I want to make this point one more time. These are middle schoolers without engineering degrees. No, never went to planning, so they figured that out. How is it that we as adults can't figure this out? We know what the answer is. We can redesign our roads for human beings, not just for cars. This is a school that did a demonstration bike lane. There were a lot of parents that said parents will never let their kids ride to school. It's Whitefish, Montana, by the way. They have big logging trucks. It's in that part of the state, a lot of logging. So I said, would you try it temporarily? Put it up for 1 week. Just try it at almost no cost. And they filled the schoolyard with bikes. This has been my mantra since. Let's just try it. So at Rolling Acres, the kids told us we see lots of this kind of activity. Kids trying to cross in front of parents that are trying to pick up, cars stopping literally in the middle at the intersection. So these are the kids collecting before data, which they did a couple of weeks ago. This is them setting up the demonstration project that was up all day today, set it up yesterday afternoon, and this is them this afternoon. They were out collecting data out there as a dismissal. So hopefully we'll have some data to report for you from them. I'm going to just say this one more time. If middle schoolers can do this, I think the rest of us in this room can too. We can be doing a better job. By the way, you can create this is all road stuff, pop-up retail destinations, festival space, food courts, community gardens. There are lots of these kinds of things that we can demonstrate at low cost. I would challenge us when we get to our planning phase of the conversation tonight, let's think about what some of these low-cost opportunities are. What can you recommend to the Regional Planning Commission? And I will leave you with one last resource that I think is a perfect companion to Charles's Arrested Mobility document, which is from Tool Design, a national design and engineering firm that focuses on the 3 E's: empathy, ethics, and equity. Their empathy says, by going out and walking in a space, you have a much better understanding of the challenges of the people who live there. And walking with them allows you to learn from them their lived experiences. So as you think about community engagement and discussions about that, don't ask people to come to the table. Take the table to the people who we want to visit with. Second is ethics. I feel as an engineer I have an ethical responsibility to think about every user in that picture, not just the vehicle, but all these pedestrians, these young ones, some older ones behind them. And most importantly, equity. If we aren't thinking about the people that we have most disenfranchised from our planning processes for literally centuries, and certainly all the decades of the modern planning era, then we aren't doing our job. Right? And that's what I think of when I think of equity, making sure the lived experiences of all are driving our decisions. We know that if we build these places, we will have healthier people, healthier economies, and a healthier environment. It's often called the triple bottom line, but I'm going to bring it down to a very simple fact. When I started doing this work 25 and 30 years ago, my kids who are now 25 and 27, we were reading articles that said we may raise the first generation in the modern world to have statistically shorter life expectancies than their parents. That was a publication from 2005. In 2019, this journal article in the Journal of the American Medical Association said it's happened. Kids who are growing up today, statistically about a 2-year life expectancy reduction compared to their parents. Because of the diseases of sedentary lifestyle. Because they can't be free-range kids. We can do better than this. I know we can. So that's the challenge I leave to the group, because we owe it to the next generation. And a world for a free-range kid who can walk to a corner store is a world for a free-range senior who doesn't get housebound when they can't drive anymore. And a free-range person with disabilities who's using a wheelchair, is visually impaired or blind, right? For free-range everybody to get back out there. So with that, I'm going to thank you guys for your kind attention tonight and for your thoughtfulness, your desire to be here and be part of this process. I see Peoria on the cusp of amazing things, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years that I've been working with you, and I feel it's a privilege to get to hang out with all of you and go walk, and if I can help, I'm always want to, because this is a cool city. So keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. I'm sorry I'm so fast. I'm going to hand you that. I'm going to bring, do you want your slides back? Or Charles? Good.
All right, thanks so much, Mark. We love hearing about all the different perspectives. It's great to have local knowledge plus someone who comes in from visiting so many cities around the country and around the world. I realized that I forgot to mention and thank the Neighborhood House for hosting. So we love the fact that we're able to be within the community in an organization that's doing a lot for the community. So thank you for that. All right, so my next task is to introduce Charles Brown. Charles T. Brown is a renowned urban planner and policy expert dedicated to creating safe, healthy, and equitable communities. With nearly 20 years of experience in the public and private sectors, military, and academia, he has gained international recognition for his groundbreaking research and practice. Charles is the founder and managing principal of Equitable Cities, LLC, a nationally recognized urban planning, policy, and research and multimedia firm working at the intersection of transportation, health, and equity. He has secured and managed millions of dollars for policy, planning, and research projects, and has served as an advisor for prestigious organizations like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the United Nations Populations Fund. An engaging keynote speaker and workshop presenter, Charles delivers powerful talks on health equity, transportation equity, and the importance of incorporating health in all policies. A military veteran and recipient of numerous awards, including the 2022 Bicycle Leadership Award from the League of American Bicyclists and the 2023 Public Service Award from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Charles is a sought-after expert and advisor on urban planning, equity, and sustainability. His work has been published in several international journals and featured in national outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post. As a member of the Global Safety Advisory Board at Lime, member of the Board of Directors with America Walks, and member of the Transportation Research Board Pedestrian Safety and Bicycle Transportation Committees, Charles continues to be at the forefront of creating healthy, equitable, and livable communities for all. And with that, I am very grateful to present Charles Brown.
Thank you. Everyone, please stand. Thank you. My mother taught me a long time ago, whenever I enter a room, people should stand for me, so thanks for standing. All right, you can have a seat. I know we just had, thank you for standing. I feel welcome now. Again, my name is Charles T. Brown, founder and CEO of Equitable Cities. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks to so many people. You know who you are. I really appreciate it. And give it up one more time for my brother from another mother, Mark Fenton. Today I want to talk with you about equity matters, the importance of centering equity in transportation planning, policy, and research. Before I do, it's important to remind you first that I had hair. It's also important to let you know that it's never easy to get up before a crowd like this and have a conversation on any topic, let alone equity. I'm reminded that a long time ago in that picture, when I think I was around 8 or 9, I used to carry a teddy bear with me. That teddy bear kept me comfortable to take pictures because I hated taking pictures, but I missed that teddy bear. And I have a 5-year-old son now, Camden. Every night he goes to sleep with that teddy bear. So that's also, or a similar one, a silent reminder that I'm sacrificing time away from my family and my friends to be here with you. So I hope you're respectful of my time and my energy, and please ask any and all questions at the end because someone has sacrificed for me to be here. Next, I want to thank my family. I grew up in a rural town called Sugarlock, Mississippi, Shaquela. It has a population of around 450 people. which swells to around 550 when my cousins from Chicago, Detroit, and Milwaukee come there. So if you're looking for a place to visit, please visit Sugar Lock. And that is, give me some sugar or lock your door. It's Shaquela in terms of the Choctaw Indians, which were there previously. But I identify first and foremost as a street level researcher. I identify as a street level researcher because I think many of the answers to the questions that we have are found in the streets among the people. So if you're to do this work, you are to get out among the people and ask them what the solutions are. I also identify as a pracademic because I'm a professor part-time at Rutgers University in New Jersey. I'm also a practicing planner. So you combine those together, I'm a pracademic. That means I got the theory, I also got the solution. So if you're looking for an expert to solve your problems, contact Equitable Cities. That's the only plug, Equitable Cities. Now moving on, what then is equity? There are so many conversations out there about what equity is. We're gonna set the stage here tonight and clarify what it really is. See, equity refers to the fair distribution of resources and opportunities regard of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc. See, equity is about everyone. Unfortunately, in this country, we've been socialized to believe that when we say equity, we're only talking about a specific population. But equity is about ensuring that everyone has a right to open space, to transportation, and ultimately to mobility. See, in short, equity is about giving people what they need to enjoy full, healthy lives. But when you're doing this equity work, if you stop there, politically everyone will accept you. But if you push further and you say, well, that's not just what equity is, because there's a historical context here which requires you to do more, then you find that equity is the presence of justice and fairness within the procedures, the processes, and the distribution of resources and materials. Or, in the words of my Mississippi mother, if you're looking for an inequity, follow the money. See, equity isn't just a desktop exercise. See, facing equity requires an understanding of the underlying or the root cause of oppression in our country. And when you understand equity, you really understand equity, it takes you to racial equity. See, racial equity argues that one must transform the behaviors, one must transform the institutions and the systems that intentionally, disproportionately impact people of color. But racial equity isn't just about excluding everyone. It is about increasing access to power, redistributing wealth and resources, eliminating barrier. But encouraging racial equity is not about excluding other marginalized groups. Why is that important to say? Because oftentimes when you say racial equity and you're speaking to the needs of Black and brown people, people stand up and say, what about gender? What about abilities? What about disabilities? What about income? What about geography? Well, all of those things matter too, except when you understand intersectionality, when you look at gender equity, when you look at income equity, disability equity, etc., the darker the skin within those groups, the deeper the oppression. So if you're looking to solve the problem, you go to racial equity because the root cause of this is systemic racism. So then it's not about what's seen, it becomes about what's unseen. And for those who have seen this photograph before, Mark and others, I ask that you don't speak at this point. I want to invite you all into my graduate studio at Rutgers University, where I get planners or aspiring planners from all over the world. I asked them to take a look at this photograph. This is the West Ward of Newark, New Jersey. This isn't an altered photograph. This is how it looks today. I asked them, if you're going to be a planner, what would you do to change this photograph? I want to ask you now to scream out what changes you would make to this photograph. If no one says anything, I'm going to call on you because I am what? A professor. So start yelling out what changes you would make.
Start with that sidewalk.
Sidewalk, what else? Trees, what else? What else?
Additional lighting.
Lighting, over here, what else? Plants, what else?
Buildings.
Buildings, what else?
Benches.
narrow the road, benches. Guess what? All of those things are correct. But what's also correct is you're like everyone else around the world that I show this picture to. You go to the built environment. What you should say is, where are the people? We don't change the environment just for the sake of the environment. You're designing an environment for people. And in the Westwater, Newark, when we were doing this study, when we were going from before pictures to after pictures, they wanted every single thing you mentioned. But high on their list was don't forget about us. So when you do that rendering, engineers and planners and policy people, before and after showing the changes that are coming, you make sure that you understand the demographics of that community, you respect that community, and you show them in the after picture. Why? Because then you won't say they don't want bike lanes. You won't say they don't want improvements. They don't fear change. They fear the likelihood of them not being there once change comes. So they're not fighting against infrastructure. They're fighting against the reality that you don't see them in the future with that infrastructure present. And why is this important? Because I know that transportation and urban planning and so on has been weaponized as a tool of oppression within our society. That's a very bold statement, but I'm going to show you evidence. Because without data and evidence, all you have is an opinion. I didn't just come here with an opinion. I came here with the facts. And what are the facts? Go to any major city around this country, and you're going to see highways that have destroyed Black, brown, and low-income communities. You're going to see, when you look closely at transportation, a strong connection to the climate injustice that we're seeing each and every day. See, I was both fortunate and unfortunate to have survived Hurricane Katrina that hit Mississippi back in 2005. I was also fortunate to survive Hurricane Sandy that hit New Jersey in 2012. And if you're wondering if hurricanes follow me, the answer is no. So what then are we talking about here? See, it doesn't just stop at the climate connection. Mark touched on this. People are dying disproportionately. But it's not just anyone. See, the people who are dying disproportionately happen to be older adults, people of color, and people walking in low-income communities. But the truth of the matter is, we don't have to say all that. Because I talked about racial equity. And the real truth is, it is older adults with low income who are people of color who are dying disproportionately. But see, the data becomes politicized because if we don't say all matters, nothing gets done. Now that's a political reality, one in which we must deal with, but we must understand when people are dying then, it's not just behavioral, as engineers and planners have said across this country. They have said, and you can find this in the media, it's behavioral. It's all about the choices that we make. I'm here to change your mind on that. It's not so simple. See, we know that race determines place, which ultimately determines health. There's an illusion of a choice being made. People don't just determine where they live. There are systems at work that you have to see. Here's the burden. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. And I want to make them clear for you today. This is Peoria. I'm from Mississippi. You're from Peoria. I may say it differently. To us, you all are up south and we're down south. You get that? You're up south. We're down south. And so here's a map. I want to orient you on this map because this is how I got into planning, policy, and research. On this map, the blue represents where white people live predominantly. The green represents where black people live, purple, Hispanic, the other color is Asian. What do you see on this map? What is the cause of what you see on this map? What is that called in the planning context? Anyone know? Well, I'll tell you what it looks like for someone on the ground. If you're black, you have a very slim chance of ever entering a white community in Peoria. If you're white, you have a slim chance of ever entering a black community in Peoria. But we're not going to just stick to Peoria because if I stay there, you'll think this is thematic, or episodic, my bad. This is thematic. So we're gonna go to the Motor City. This is Detroit. If blue represents where white people live in Detroit, green where black people live, what do you see? Say you're in my classroom, you gotta speak up. What is this you see?
Segregation.
You see segregation, but that's not good enough. Specificity is important. So I'm gonna take you to Houston, one of the largest metropolitan planning areas in the country. What do you see in Houston building on what was said over here? Come on. All right, so I'll take you to Atlanta because in many ways it determined the most recent presidential election. There was a reason they were waiting on those voting records from certain parts of Atlanta. They knew where you lived. But you won't get it, so we got to go to the nation's capital because you think it's just down south. What do you see in the map? You see redlining, but what is it based on? Well, I'll take you to New York because on paper, it is the most politically progressive place in the US outside of the state of California, debatable. If you don't see right now racial residential segregation, then you have a problem. But more importantly, if you don't see the role that transportation played in helping to sustain racial residential segregation, then you have a problem. But as I'm traveling around the world, people say, Charlie Brown, because you know my name is Charles Brown. And all my white friends just call me Charlie Brown without permission. I love them. Some of you have already done it. I love you too. So Charlie Brown, are there exceptions to this rule? I tell them yes. Go to Portland where you don't see any black people. So what that means then, something is intentional. See, it's not even statistically possible to have an all-white place in a place as diverse as the United States. See, this is by design, this is by policy, but it's been hidden from you. But if you don't get it, and if you think this is a history lesson, history doesn't say goodbye. History says see you later. And what's the later? Right now. See, the stats that Mark and I showed you were from like 2012, 2019 in terms of the crashes. They just released a new report. And guess what? Nothing has changed. Well, it's not completely true. It used to be that Hispanics died at a disproportionate fashion to the population. That's no longer. It's now just blacks and Native Americans. So something has changed. The question for you is why has the Hispanic Latino crash rate dropped in this country? I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it has something to do with race and ethnicity and how we classify who is white in this country. Because when you look at the US Census, if you're from Northern Africa, you're white. But we'll have a different conversation because we're not here for that. What we're here for is to understand how can we create a safe, equitable, and inclusive system for all? Well, you cannot go around believing that it's behavioral. See, it's about design. And here's why. Take a look at this map. When I was growing up, loved my mother to death, but she smoked. And I was that middle child. I am that middle child, so I didn't like it. And I would say, Mom, why don't you stop smoking? And she would say, as a black mother would say, boy, you can't tell me what to do. But I would always ask questions about why she smoked. But I would also notice when we would leave our environment to go to nicer places, she wouldn't smoke. So I started in my head making a correlation between the environment we lived in where almost every person smoked versus where we went, no one smoked, so was she embarrassed? So she didn't smoke, but I saw a correlation between the environment. I bring this up because people who say it's behavioral start at your behavior. They move to the fact then that if you continue doing what you're doing, it's going to lead to disease and injury and ultimately a mortality. I didn't want that to be the faith of my mother, the faith of anyone, so I started studying. And what we know now as professionals is that this is partly true. However, it's deeper than that. See, the real truth is you got to go further upstream to understand why it's likely that my mother smokes. Or you should ask the question, given that my mother smokes, why don't any of her children smoke? I can answer that quickly. We don't live there, number one. Number two, we understand the connection between the living conditions, the institutional inequities, and the social inequities. So here's the truth once and for all. It's not just about your behavior. See, in this country, there are social inequities that have a bidirectional relationship with institutional inequities, which then create an environment which impacts your behavior, which leads to injury and mortality. And so if you, or disease and injury and then mortality. And so if you're walking around Peoria here and someone say the environment made me do it, believe them. See, it's the environment, and we can change the environment. And so you all may say, well, where do we start? Well, there are a number of places we can start, and this is a framework that I would like for you to adopt. It looks at recognition justice, distributive justice, procedural justice, interactional justice, representational justice, and restorative justice. And then the most important one of all, you simply need to care. As Mark talked about empathy, we need greater empathy. So I'm gonna walk you through this framework. You can apply this framework to your transportation challenge or any challenge you're having in life, and it is applicable. Number one, always ask the question from a recognition justice standpoint. Before we do anything, have we considered the damage inflicted by a lack of recognition and misrecognition? Have we considered that? Number two, distributive justice. Ask the question, who has physical access to the street, the park, or the trail? Why do you want to ask this? Because my work has shown me across the country, as it relates to Safe Routes to School and others, is that minority parents, for the most part, do not feel that their children are safe from traffic when bicycling in their neighborhoods. So you're going out saying, Safe Routes to School, Safe Routes to School. It's a great program. But if my mother doesn't feel that I'm safe to bike there, I'm not gonna bike there, as simple as that. And how can you convince my mother that it's safe or safer? Make it safer. Don't just talk about it, as we say in the black barbershop, be about it. This is important too, because even though we live in close proximity to parks, many of us still feel we can't safely bike there. So what does that tell you from a geographic equity standpoint? Proximity is not access. See, I can be proximate to my guy here doing this beautiful sign language. I have no idea what he's doing. I hope he's saying exactly what I'm saying. And I trust him. See, procedural justice is about getting someone here to speak to the people that need it no matter what form it's in. We were intentional about that, and you're seeing firsthand what it's like to care about everyone. That's equity. That takes us to the next form, procedural justice. Who has influence over the design, the operations, and the programming of spaces? Why are we bringing this up? Because it goes back to dangerous by design. I train young black males in my community about the importance of design and planning, and what I know because they tell me, many of them are not included in planning and transportation decision-making processes. Why is this sad though? Beyond the obvious. Well, if you look at the data, they're more likely to be the victims of those decisions. So why not have them there now to help design streets that are not only safe for them, but their families as well? Which takes us to interactional justice. What makes people feel welcomed or unwanted in a space? I feel welcomed here, I hope you do too. But we must be mindful that the moment I walk out of this room, no matter the color of law enforcement, I stand a greater chance of being harassed than you do. In fact, African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement, and as it relates to gender equity, males are killed or stopped at a rate 7 times that of females. Let's stop normalizing stuff. We gotta be honest about what the truth is, because from a representational justice standpoint, people don't feel that their experience and their history is represented in a space. We walk about, we say we want redevelopment, we want urban renewal, etc. But think about the cultures that were present there. We must maintain those. Why? Because culturally erasure takes place across this country, and people are fighting back, not physically, but through art, through poems, through poetry, etc. Which then takes us to restorative justice. If you're not rectifying the injustices arising from your decisions, whether they were yours or not, you're perpetuating systemic racism. That takes us to the last one, care. How do we demonstrate the care for the space and other people in it? We recognize our unique differences, whether we're talking religion, whether we're talking gender, and we ensure that everyone, again, is welcome. But then it gets to, well, what should we measure? What should we look for, Charlie Brown? Here's a list of things you can look for, and I'll put them up on the screen without going into much detail, simply for you to capture here. If you want to hold your MPO accountable, look to these measures. If you want to hold your city accountable, look to these measures. If you want to hold your state accountable, look to these measures. If you want to hold your nation accountable, look to these measures. And why is that important? Because if you don't know what to measure, you don't know what accountability looks like. So look at these various buckets, take them down, and ask questions about them as plans are being developed. And then lastly, you're probably saying, well, give me the short list. What can be done right now? I'm going to give you action items quickly so we can have a conversation. But these are things that I know you can do because I've done it around the country. Action item number 1. I started this conversation talking about equity, and then I went into emphasizing the importance of racial equity. You want to ask every agency that you are part of to commit to equity through the adoption of a racial equity action plan. If they push back and tell you, we're just going to do equity, they're not serious. Because every piece of data they look at is going to take them back to race. So racial equity action plan. I know this is possible because I've been working with an organization called SCAG, the largest metropolitan planning organization in the country in California. It's the Southern California Associations of Government. We've created a racial equity baseline conditions report, which led to a racial equity action plan. If you're looking for a model as to what transportation agencies should be doing, look at SCAG. Google the acronym SCAG. Action number 2, prioritize investments and maintenance in minority and low-income communities. And it's not just enough to ask for them to build it. They must maintain it. On our walk, we saw infrastructure present, but we can see the harm inflicted by a lack of maintenance. So maintenance must be part of that. And I want to take you to Jersey City, New Jersey, one of the more diverse communities or cities in America. There I had the pleasure of working with them on a Vision Zero action plan and a bicycle and pedestrian plan. We did not ask the community to just come to us. We got on the bikes and biked around the community with them. We called it a handlebar survey. We also did the traditional forms of meeting people where they are. This ultimately led to a prioritization plan and equity action plan that I wrote in this plan. You could see here where we're labeling parts of the community high priority all the way down to lowest priority. This is the system that was in place on the left-hand side prior to that plan. On the right is where it was a few years ago. Here's how the mayor is today, happy, because Jersey City just went last year without any fatalities on their roadway. One caveat, city owns streets, which is what they control. So it's possible, but you need leadership. See, you didn't just have a mayor who believed that it was possible. He hired the right consultants to do it. But not only that, He gave power to the staff that were staff of color that knew what to do as well. But not only that, you had advocacy groups that were diverse, that were invested in the community, who saw a vision themselves. But not only that, you had residents who came out and who advocated and who held everyone accountable. So it's possible. Which takes us to number 3, the importance of full and fair participation. Always ensure the full and fair participation of racialized minority groups. I had the pleasure of working with Hillsborough TPO, which is another planning organization down in Hillsborough, Florida. You can see how committed they were to humanizing the data in the process through the pictures included in this plan. It is by far one of the best non-discrimination and equity plans in the country. And I'm not just saying so because I was a part of it. Which takes us to, and I'll speed up here, action number 4, language, equity, and access. You want to see if someone is serious about equity? Measure them based on language, access, and literacy. Action 5. It's important to document and increase the mobility and access for the elderly and persons with disabilities. And as we're discussing persons with disabilities, the way you can tell if someone is serious is when they look beyond just physical disabilities. If they're not talking about cognitive and other disabilities, they're not serious about disabilities, justice, and rights. Which takes us to action number 6. Women, those identifying as women, and female-headed households. We must engage with them separately because what a man thinks, those identifying as men as well, is safe. Not all women think are safe. We must design our streets for our most vulnerable populations, and that includes our racial and ethnic foreign-born populations as well. And that's regardless of gender because of the cultural aspects. And I know this is possible because I've gone around the country doing so. And when I asked them, do they want bicycle lanes, you can see here that most of them from Austin, Texas to Tucson, Arizona, thought it was important or it impacted them positively. Which then takes us to action number 8, gentrification and displacement. Walking around here, I saw a great housing stock. I saw infrastructure starting to happen. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking the moment they get this right, if they're not proactive, those living here will be displaced. So if you know, as we know in the Black Barbershop, that trees planted in minority communities mature just in time for gentrification to take place, you should be doing something right now. Don't wait until it happens, be proactive. Which takes us to number 9, racialized zoning and land use. See, if you believe in racism, systemic racism, many people have argued that one of his first tools was zoning. And so what people are starting to do around this country, starting in Connecticut, is show the impact of racialized zoning on how communities develop. Google desegregate Connecticut for an example of what you can do to see the impact of zoning on your community and others. Which then takes us to, as I wrap up, law enforcement. It doesn't matter if you build it, if I can't come, I'll move on. Because see, there's a narrative out there, the scary black male narrative. Somehow we're dangerous. There's also a narrative out there, the angry black female narrative that we have to tackle. And how do you tackle that? You start collecting the data that shows that it exists and what an impact it's having on black lives, brown lives, and experiences. Then that takes us to, you must deal with these race-based 911 calls. So you're putting in the infrastructure, you have the housing, you have the programming, you have the pop-ups that Mark talked about. But if people are gonna call the cops when I show up, what's the point? So what's the takeaway? We gotta work with law enforcement. They should be present here because they are part of our community, and we need to understand what the disconnect is. Which takes us to jaywalking. On our walk today, few people mentioned the importance of crosswalks. Every time one street connects with another one, the crosswalk should be present. What's the point of having legal unmarked crosswalks if I'm going to be stopped for jaywalking? See, there is a movement around this country to decriminalize jaywalking. Kansas City is doing it. Virginia's doing it. If Virginia's doing it, I know you can do it, but that's a different story. Love you, Virginia. Let's move on. The last thing here, biking in BIPOC communities. Mark showed my study on arrested mobility. You can go to the website on arrested mobility. But what I want you to know to bring this conversation to an end is that if you're very serious about equity and justice, you will risk it all. Why? Because simply put, justice is what love looks like in public. I love you. Thank you for your time. My name is Charles T. Brown. If you're leaving, you can contact me at 1-800-CHARLES-T-BROWN. We're going to do something next. It probably includes a break. If you want to go on break, we got 5 minutes. 5-minute break. If you have questions just for me right now, I can answer some questions before you leave. Everyone else, 5-minute break. Any questions, raise your hand. Yes.
How do you get the people to the table? So we did a project in Peoria where we took our set of tents on the street corners where we wanted the folks from the community to come talk to us. We had one of the neighborhood advocates walking up and down the street, get somebody to walk 1 block. Like we had done a walk out already with neighborhood folks, but just we were trying to be there, be visible, and we couldn't get people to walk a block.
So the question was, how do you get people to the table? You took the table to them. What did you serve at the table? Water. Nah, I wouldn't have shown up neither.
And the challenge is most of
No, all seriousness, that was nice. So water and cookies are nice. Except Mark is talking about, and I'm talking about changing the built environment and how we want people healthier, and you took cookies. Slight contradiction, because what you eat matters more than how often you exercise in terms of losing weight. So next time, take donuts. But no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, really. So that's a very tough question, because I would have to know the context of the community. I would have to know what you were promoting, encouraging, inquiring about. So what I do in situations like that is a very detailed demographic analysis to understand the various racial and ethnic people present. And then I design an outreach and engagement plan tailored to each of those groups. I also ensure from a language standpoint, if there are persons that don't speak English, they're present.
one of the biggest challenges.
Okay, so what's the problem? You had everything. What's the
I
problem?
don't know, they would come.
They wouldn't come.
Organization.
So it was you all.
Yeah, I mean, even people like we
Did you have a diverse
people
group?
walking down the street.
What time was it that you went? Now I'm going to interrogate you on just on
It was like
what time was it?
3 to 6.
3 to 6. That's your problem.
And they're open,
The time.
but I'm part of the community. They know I care.
Who gets off work at 3 o'clock?
Well, so it was near a school zone, so we were trying to get parents and kids walking to school.
Yeah. When I'm with my kids, picking them up at rush hour, most people don't want to be stopped. And I'm joking. But we did transit studies, and we learned the hard way too. 3 to 6 is the wrong time. People are going to work or leaving work. Oftentimes, that's not the best time. 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. is rush hour. That means that people are rushing home.
So then do you have, like, will they come back out after?
So it was 3 to 6 p.m. during the week, right?
Yeah.
So I also got to get home and cook. I got to get home and prepare my kids for the next day. A better option would have been the weekend. But here's the challenge, and this is not for you. Most government officials don't do the work on the weekends because that means they have to work more time or longer time. 3 to 6 is not the ideal time. If you want to meet people, it needs to be either after 6 p.m., but preferably on the weekend. Thank you for entertaining that joke too, okay? Appreciate you. Anyone else? We got to get a question over here. Oh, Mark Fenton, go ahead. A question over here since you all are not taking your break. Question over here. All right, I'm gonna call on someone. I'm looking at a lady in a turquoise shirt. I'm gonna call on her. If someone doesn't save her in 5 seconds, you gotta save her by raising your hand. 5. See, it always works. You see, you got love in the room. You see that? You should give her a hug. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how to phrase this, but anything with food vendors or more commerce in the street, how do we build that around this plan or include that in the plan?
Bring food vendors into the street?
Vendors, food, small businesses, how do we include them?
Yeah, so have a plan. Create a plan that's focused specifically on them. Let me know when to stop too, Gabriel, because we got to do the panel. Okay. A lot of times we've criminalized the vendors who don't have the license to be in business formally or legally. So we got to create a process where that's decriminalized so we can implement some culture into the vendors that are present and give people an opportunity to make some additional income or to just give away what they're doing. So what I think you have to be as a conduit between them and the local government to set up a process that makes it easier for people to be included. Educate them on the law. Some of them may not know what the law is regarding being a vendor in public space. So it's really about engaging with them in a focus group style manner to understand what they would like ideally and then creating a plan off of that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We're back here saying we don't know where to start right now. This is like bringing water through a fire hose right now.
Water through a fire hose.
So what type of maybe equity audit tools can municipalities be utilizing just to get started on the journey of trying to advocate for equity when it comes to our infrastructure projects, our roadways, just to create that baseline so then from there we can build a plan?
Yeah, so how do you eat an elephant?
One by
There you go. Don't complicate it. What you heard was 400 years of history that got us here today. Where you want to start is now on the back of that. Start with a racial equity assessment of every single program that is important to you. Hopefully you don't have more than 3 right now, because then you'll be, right, I gotta make another decision. So think about what's most important, what's most dire, and start there. But also partnerships and collaborations. You shouldn't have to do all the work by yourself. Look around at the beautiful people here present today. Get each person to lead an initiative, but ensure that those people are guided by, or through the lens of racial equity. So that's how you start, by committee. You can get much further together. Are we gonna have the panel?
We got 3 minutes.
We got 3 more minutes.
John?
Yes, sir.
Could I throw an idea out?
Mhm.
Answer to this?
Go ahead, Mark.
It kind of gets to both of these. I feel like I've been really lucky. This work we've done with the Y, it's an example, I think, of going where people are. So if we had gone to either of the schools that we worked at, or the schools we've been working at, and said, kids, come to a meeting about the upcoming Safe Routes to School plan, nobody would have showed, right? This idea of people not showing up. Instead, we went to where the kids already are. There's a Teen Reach program at the Y that has kids in an after-school program. And we said, would you like to participate in this thing? We're going to actually potentially be going out and collecting data at that, the pop-up project. And some number of kids kind of raised their hands. It's an example of sort of A, a partnership you just talked about. B, it's got a diverse group of kids representing a range of races, ethnicities, income levels. And there's some certain amount of self-selection by virtue of which kids have chosen to participate. But it was a classic example to my mind of taking the table to them rather than asking them to come and show up at our meeting or at our event, and then building a path for them to get involved in this data collection. And in the second one, the first one, it was the city's Complete Streets exercise on Main Street, right? That pop-up between Main and Jefferson. The second was their idea. We said to them, what do you guys want to do? And they said, our middle school has traffic chaos. We feel like we're going to get run over at the intersection right next to the school. and we went through the process with them at their school. I think that's an example of the kind of thing we're talking about when we say taking the table to the people, because that's another one of those really nice phrases, right? But existing entities that are capturing resident voices and experiences may be one of the best places to go. Churches, I have done plenty of talks and led walk audits from church basements and found them to be often very powerful social institutions in some communities. That's just another example. So I've given an example of a Y, a church. A third was a Boys and Girls Club that I worked with in a community where they were a strong social structure, and it was at least a starting point to changing the conversation and getting out of the expect you to come to a meeting at the planning offices or at the library or wherever. So I'm just trying to give examples of and those can be, in my mind, first step opportunities too. Because once you start to wedge in there and sort of learn, they begin the path. Maybe build on this. But
right, so Mark is speaking to the importance of community champions, trusted advocates. I'll speak more to the need to incentivize. I know you all have done all these steps. Your time is the biggest issue. Following that, there was not a carrot. I would have offered cash. Yes, I pay people for information. Few people are going to turn down cash. I would have also probably, had people enter a chance to win bicycles as a family. You could partner with a local bicycle group to provide bicycles for the raffles, marketing for them. It's a tax write-off, so they could do that. So think about a much larger incentive. And then think about the agency that you represent. There may be an elephant in the room. There may be some history associated with that agency which is serving as a barrier to you connecting. If you don't address the elephant in the room, they're not going to come out. I don't care how perfect your plans are. As a government entity, you may say, well, I can't give people cash directly. You can hire consultants who can figure out a way. There you go. Normally I charge for that. Over here, last one.
Yeah, I just from experience, because I used to work for USAID projects in West Africa, and I had to go to different countries to work with people. And one project, we went there, and the first day we asked them to come to us, and we did take the project to them, but no one showed up. So what we did was we went on the local radio station, identified a woman, which she seemed to be popular in the community.
Trusted advocate.
Exactly. And we took her to the radio station, gave her talking points, and we didn't say anything on the show. She just said everything. And the next day, the whole place was packed. And then we realized that was working, and back to the community champion and the incentives. So because we're US aid funded project, we couldn't give money out to people. So what we did was we came up with a project and said we're paying these people because they were consultants. And so we found champions in those communities, and we started giving them an allowances for them to actually give the information to them. So they were like our middlemen, and the project was really successful. So sometimes it's not taking just taking the table to them, it's making sure they look like you, like they want, like people, if you're not part of the community, I think Father and I were just talking about this, if you're not part of the community, they don't really believe what you're selling them. And because in West Africa, for instance, we have so many different projects. Go to the villages and tell them we are going to give you all these things, you're going to improve your life, and 4 years, the project is done, you're back to square one. And so there is a lot of mistrust in these organizations like us. I'm involved in all of that. And so we have to build a trust, and the way to get them is to show them that you are part of the community. And sometimes we plan, we set up the project, we sit back and we identify people that can lead a project for us, and we train them to do that.
Right, thank you. Move at the speed of trust. What's your name?
Zach.
Zach. Give it up for Zach. So
So we'd like to thank Charles again. Can we get another? So right now we're gonna reshuffle some people. We have like some facilitators sitting in the same table. We need to spread you guys out. We need at least 5 to 6 people per table. And then we're going to go into a facilitated discussion. And you know, our facilitators are gonna lead that. We have bathrooms down that way to the right, I believe.
Right there.
And also we have plenty of food, so please feel free to take as much as you want.